Millionaire CEO picks up the wrong luggage. Then a small detail changes everything. Oliver Grant stepped into the arrival terminal, still finishing a work call. The flight had landed minutes ago, but his mind was already somewhere else. Numbers, meetings, decisions waiting to be made. He reached the luggage carousel without really looking, and grabbed a black suitcase that looked exactly like his. A few feet away, Naomi Brooks stood quietly as the belt slowed down. She was tired from the flight, thinking about the medical conference ahead. Her notes, her clothes, her whole week were inside that suitcase. When it appeared, she stepped forward without hesitation. It looked right. It felt familiar. Neither of them checked the tag. Neither of them stopped long enough to question it. The airport moved them forward with gentle urgency. People leaving, wheels rolling, conversations fading. The mistake happened without a sound. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. Oliver walked toward the exit, phone still at his ear. Naomi followed the signs outside, already planning the next day in her head. They passed through the same doors seconds apart, two strangers leaving the same place, unaware they had just crossed paths. The night felt ordinary. No tension, no warning, just the quiet feeling of a trip beginning to settle. Nothing suggested anything unusual had happened. Nothing except the luggage in their hands. In Oliver's world, mistakes were obvious and costly. They demanded quick action and control. This one felt invisible, too small to notice, too human to predict. Neither of them knew it yet. But that silent exchange at the carousel had already changed the course of the week. Not with noise or urgency, just with a simple, unnoticed choice. And once it surfaced, there would be no turning it back. Oliver Grant had built his life around precision, predictability, and outcomes he could control. As the CEO of a fast-growing logistics company, his days were measured in meetings, forecasts, and decisions worth millions of dollars. He was respected, admired, and quietly alone in ways no one ever questioned. Travel had become routine, almost invisible to him, just another corridor between obligations. He told himself that this was freedom, even when it felt more like absence. He checked into the hotel without slowing down, answered emails in the elevator, and reviewed notes while the room door closed behind him. Everything about the space looked familiar, clean, efficient, and temporary. This was where he always landed, no matter the city or the purpose of the trip. A place to sleep, think, and leave without a trace. Nothing in that room suggested that this stay would be any different. Naomi Brooks arrived with a very different weight on her shoulders. She was a clinical psychologist, traveling alone to attend a medical conference she had spent months preparing for. Her work focused on emotional resilience, but her own life was quietly stretched thin. Balancing motherhood, career, and constant self-expectation had left her tired in a way rest never fully fixed. Still, she carried herself with calm because that was what everyone expected from her. She unpacked carefully, placing each item with intention, as if order could bring a sense of grounding. The conference mattered to her, not for recognition, but because it represented a step forward she had almost postponed. There were moments on the flight when she questioned whether she should even be there, but she pushed those thoughts aside, reminding herself why she said yes in the first place. This trip was supposed to be about growth, not doubt. Both of them believed they were in control of their week. Oliver thought in terms of strategy and results, already mapping the meetings ahead. Naomi thought in terms of preparation and presence, focusing on doing her best without burning out. They were strangers living parallel stories, shaped by different pressures. Neither imagined that something small had already linked their paths. The suitcase sat quietly in each of their rooms, unnoticed for the moment. To Oliver, it was just something he would open later when the work was done. To Naomi, it was simply there, holding what she needed for the days ahead. No alarm went off in their minds. No sense of disruption surfaced. The mistake remained hidden, patient, and perfectly timed. If anyone had asked them that night how they felt, both would have said the same thing. Busy, tired, focused, and ready to get through the week. They believed nothing unexpected was waiting for them. They believed this trip would pass like all the others. Neither knew how close they were to discovering how wrong that assumption was. because the moment each of them finally opened that suitcase, the story would stop being ordinary. What seemed like a simple travel routine would turn into something personal and unsettling. Not dramatic in the way movies show, but quietly disruptive. The kind of disruption that doesn't shout, but stays. And once it surfaced, there would be no ignoring it. Oliver finally slowed down late that evening, when the room grew quiet and the work emails stopped coming in. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and reached for the suitcase he had dropped near the wall. It felt familiar in weight and shape, nothing that raised suspicion at first. Travel had trained him not to think twice about these details. He unzipped it with the same automatic motion he had used hundreds of times before. What he saw made him pause in a way he wasn't used to. There were no tailored suits, no neatly packed dress shoes, no folders with printed contracts. Instead, the suitcase held simple clothing, folded with care rather than precision. A paperback book on psychology sat near the top, its pages worn and marked. The space felt personal, intentional, and unmistakably not his. At first, Oliver assumed the airline had made a mistake. That assumption made him comfortable, because it meant the problem had a system and a solution. He checked the side pockets, looking for a tag, a name, anything official. There was nothing, no identification, no clear answer waiting for him. For the first time that day, he felt uncertain without knowing why. Across the city, Naomi opened her suitcase expecting to see the familiar order she had packed the night before. Instead, she was greeted by expensive fabrics, perfectly pressed shirts, and a laptop secured in a padded sleeve. She froze for a moment, standing still in the quiet of the room. Her first reaction wasn't panic, but disbelief, followed by a slow, steady breath. She knew immediately what had happened. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, taking in the situation without rushing herself. Years of listening to others had taught her that reacting too fast rarely helped. She checked the suitcase carefully, not out of curiosity, but responsibility. Among the contents, she found a business card tucked inside a small compartment. A name, a company, and an email address gave her a clear path forward. Oliver tried calling the airline, listening as automated voices transferred him from one option to another. Each response felt distant and procedural, offering timelines instead of solutions. He hung up feeling more frustrated than he expected to be. The problem wasn't urgent, but it lingered in his thoughts. It was the kind of unresolved detail he disliked carrying with him. Naomi drafted a short message, choosing her words carefully. She didn't accuse or explain too much, keeping the tone calm and direct. She simply stated that there had been a mix-up and that she believed she had his suitcase. Before sending it, she hesitated for a brief second. Then she pressed send, trusting that clarity was enough. When Oliver's phone vibrated, he expected another email about numbers or schedules. Instead, he read a message that felt unexpectedly human. It didn't demand anything, and it didn't assume the worst. It simply acknowledged a shared mistake and opened a door forward. And with that message, the week quietly shifted in a direction neither of them had planned. Oliver sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the phone still in his hand, staring at the message longer than necessary. It wasn't dramatic or urgent, but it unsettled him in a quiet way he couldn't name. He was used to problems that came with pressure, deadlines, and financial consequences. This one felt different because it asked for patience instead of action. That unfamiliar feeling made him uncomfortable. He replied with a short confirmation, keeping his tone professional and distant. They exchanged only what was needed, nothing more, nothing less. When she suggested a simple solution, leaving the suitcase at the front desk, he agreed immediately. It was efficient, clean, and required no interaction. That should have been the end of it. After the exchange was arranged, the room felt unusually still. Oliver tried to return to his work, but his focus drifted back to the suitcase that wasn't his. He wondered about the person who owned it, then quickly dismissed the thought. Curiosity had never been useful in his line of work. Yet that night, it lingered longer than he expected. Across the city, Naomi placed the phone face down on the table and let out a slow breath. She told herself the situation was resolved, simple, and temporary. Still, there was a quiet vulnerability in knowing her personal belongings had been in a stranger's hands. She reminded herself that mistakes didn't always carry intention. Sometimes they were just moments where life slipped out of sync. Naomi changed into comfortable clothes and sat near the window. watching the city lights below. The conference ahead suddenly felt heavier than it had earlier that day. She thought about her son back home, the sitter she trusted, and the part of her that always felt torn. Travel was never just travel for her. It was negotiation. Between ambition, responsibility, and exhaustion, something was always left behind. Oliver stood by the window in his room too, though he didn't realize the parallel. He watched the same city from a different angle, feeling a restlessness he rarely allowed himself to notice. The week was supposed to be straightforward, predictable, controlled. Instead, a simple mix-up had shifted his internal balance. He didn't like how much space it was taking in his mind. Later, when Oliver dropped the suitcase at the front desk, he avoided eye contact and conversation. He treated it like a task, something to be checked off and forgotten. Naomi did the same from her side, arriving at a different time, keeping distance. They didn't meet, didn't speak, didn't exchange names, yet something unresolved remained between them. Both returned to their rooms believing the problem was handled. On the surface, it was. But beneath that neat resolution sat a quiet emotional residue neither could shake. The kind that comes from realizing how close strangers can get without ever seeing each other. And that unspoken closeness was about to surface in a way neither expected. Later that evening, Oliver decided to have dinner at the hotel restaurant, mostly because it was convenient and required no effort. He chose a table near the window, ordered something simple, and opened his phone to scroll through messages he had already read twice. The room was calm, filled with low voices and soft lighting that made everyone look more relaxed than they probably were. This was the kind of place where people sat alone without feeling lonely, or so he believed. He expected the night to pass quietly, like every other business trip. A few minutes later, Naomi entered the restaurant, scanning the room without really looking at anyone. She picked a table a short distance from his, close enough to hear the hum of conversation, but far enough to keep her space. She ordered slowly, still adjusting to the idea that the day was finally behind her. Her phone buzzed, and she smiled briefly before answering a call from a close friend back home. The comfort in her voice was immediate, unguarded, and warm. As she spoke, Oliver couldn't help but notice fragments of the conversation drifting toward him. She wasn't being loud, just honest in the way people are when they feel safe. She laughed lightly while explaining the suitcase mix-up at the airport, calling it one of those strange travel moments you don't plan for. She mentioned how calm the other person had been, how relieved she felt it was handled easily. Every detail matched his own experience exactly. Oliver froze for a second. Fork paused mid-air, as recognition settled in slowly. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was connection forming in real time. He listened without trying to, feeling something shift in his chest as her story unfolded. There was no drama in her voice, no blame, just perspective and acceptance. It made him curious in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. When Naomi ended the call, she exhaled softly and placed her phone on the table, unaware she had an audience. Oliver hesitated, weighing the instinct to stay silent against the pull to acknowledge the moment. Interrupting a stranger was not his nature, especially without purpose, but something about this felt unfinished, like a sentence cut short. He leaned slightly toward her table and spoke before he could reconsider. He told her, quietly and without assumption, that he was the other person from the airport. There was no introduction, no explanation, just the truth offered plainly. For a brief moment, she looked at him with surprise, then recognition followed. Her reaction wasn't guarded or suspicious. It was open and amused. She laughed, the tension dissolving between them instantly. Naomi invited him to join her table with a simple gesture, nothing formal or forced. Oliver accepted, feeling oddly unsure despite decades of confidence in boardrooms. They exchanged names, nothing more, letting the conversation find its own rhythm. There was no agenda, no performance, just two people acknowledging a shared moment. Neither realized yet that this small decision would quietly reshape the rest of the week. As they talked, Oliver noticed how easily the space between them softened. Naomi noticed how present he was, listening without interruption or distraction. The conversation stayed light, grounded in everyday details rather than personal history. Still, something deeper hovered beneath the surface, waiting for permission to emerge. And that unspoken potential was about to pull them both further in than expected. After sitting down together, Oliver expected the conversation to feel awkward or forced. But it didn't happen that way. There was an ease in the way Naomi spoke, choosing her words with care without sounding rehearsed or guarded. He noticed how she listened fully before responding, as if she wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. That kind of attention was rare in his world, where conversations were usually transactional. Without realizing it, he found himself slowing down to match her pace. They talked about travel first, the harmless details people share when they are still feeling each other out. Naomi mentioned how conferences always felt intense before they began, even after years of experience. Oliver shared that meetings stopped feeling important the moment he left the room, though no one ever believed him. There was a quiet humor in how they compared pressures that looked different on the surface, but felt similar inside. Neither tried to impress the other, which made the exchange feel unexpectedly grounding. As the conversation deepened, Oliver noticed himself doing something unusual, which was staying present without checking his phone. Normally, even during dinner, his attention drifted toward notifications and updates waiting for his response. That night, the device stayed face down on the table, forgotten. He realized how rare it was for someone to hold his attention without asking for anything in return. That realization unsettled him more than any confrontation ever had. Naomi sensed his attention and responded with the same openness, though she didn't name it out loud. She spoke about her work carefully, avoiding technical language, focusing instead on why it mattered to her. Helping people rebuild trust in themselves was something she believed in deeply, even when it drained her. She admitted, quietly, that she sometimes forgot to extend the same patience to herself. Oliver listened without interrupting, feeling the weight of her honesty settle in. The restaurant slowly emptied around them as time passed, though neither noticed when the plates were cleared. They stayed longer than planned, not because they were trying to make the night meaningful, but because it already was. There was a gentle awareness that neither wanted to be the first to stand up and end it, not out of romance, but out of respect for the moment they were sharing. That awareness felt fragile, and both handled it carefully. When they finally stood to leave, there was no dramatic pause or heavy silence. They simply acknowledged that the conversation had been good, better than expected. Oliver mentioned he would be in town a few days longer, stating it without implication. Naomi replied that she would be as well, her tone neutral but warm. The possibility lingered between them without being named. They walked part of the way together before naturally separating toward their rooms. There was no exchange of personal details beyond what felt appropriate in that moment. No phone numbers were offered, no plans suggested, no assumptions made. Yet both carried the quiet sense that this wasn't finished. Something had begun, not loudly, but with intention. Back in his room, Oliver noticed the unfamiliar feeling of anticipation rather than closure. Naomi felt it too, sitting on the edge of her bed, replaying the conversation without judgment. Neither framed the evening as romantic or significant, at least not consciously. They simply recognized that something human had passed between them, and that recognition was already pulling them toward a choice they hadn't made yet. The next evening, neither Oliver nor Naomi planned to see each other again, at least not consciously. Both arrived at the restaurant separately, each telling themselves it was simply the easiest place to eat after a long day. When they noticed each other across the room, there was a brief pause that felt familiar, almost reassuring. No words were exchanged at first, just a small acknowledgement that needed no explanation. Without discussing it, they ended up sitting together again. This time, the conversation moved more naturally, as if it had already been waiting to continue. They talked about their days in detail, not to impress, but to be understood. Oliver shared the weight of leadership, the constant responsibility of decisions that affected thousands of people. Naomi spoke about emotional labor, about carrying other people's pain while trying not to lose herself. There was no comparison, only recognition. As the evening unfolded, Oliver noticed how safe the space felt, even when the topics grew heavier. He admitted that success had simplified his life in practical ways, but complicated it emotionally. There was a loneliness he had normalized, convincing himself it was the cost of ambition. Saying it out loud felt unfamiliar, but also relieving. Naomi didn't try to fix it, which made the moment feel honest. Naomi, in turn, shared pieces of her life she usually kept protected. She talked about being a mother, about learning to split herself without feeling divided. She confessed that she often carried guilt for wanting more than survival and stability. Oliver listened without offering solutions, sensing that presence mattered more than advice. That mutual restraint deepened the connection between them. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as the evening stretched on, signaling time passing without pressure. Other tables turned over. Conversations ended, and chairs scraped softly against the floor. Still, they remained, grounded in the exchange that felt both ordinary and rare. There was a growing awareness that this wasn't about attraction, but alignment. Two people allowing themselves to be seen without expectation. At one point, Oliver realized he hadn't thought about work in over an hour. That absence felt strange, almost disorienting, but also deeply calming. Naomi noticed the same sense of relief, recognizing how rare it was to speak without performing. They smiled at each other more easily now, not because of flirtation, but comfort. That comfort carried its own quiet intimacy. When they finally stood to leave, the moment felt heavier than the night before. There was a shared understanding that this connection mattered, even if neither knew why yet. They walked together toward the elevators, their pace slower, more deliberate. No one reached for the other, and nothing was promised. But both felt the subtle shift of commitment forming beneath the surface. Back in their separate rooms, the silence felt different than it had the night before. It wasn't empty. It was reflective, charged with meaning still unfolding. Each lay awake longer than usual, replaying fragments of the conversation. They didn't label what they were feeling, choosing not to rush it, because something important had begun, and neither wanted to name it too soon. The following day brought realities neither of them could avoid, no matter how meaningful the connection felt. Oliver spent the morning in back-to-back meetings, navigating negotiations that demanded clarity and decisiveness. Even as he spoke with confidence, his attention drifted toward the conversation from the night before. It wasn't distraction so much as recalibration, like something inside him had quietly shifted. For the first time in years, success felt less urgent than presence. Naomi's day unfolded inside conference rooms, filled with professionals who spoke the same language she did. She presented her work with confidence, answering questions thoughtfully while managing the familiar pressure. Yet beneath the professional rhythm, something personal kept surfacing. She realized how rarely she allowed herself to feel supported without explanation. That realization followed her long after the sessions ended. Later that afternoon, Naomi received a message from home that tightened her chest. Her son wasn't sick or in trouble, but he missed her more than she expected. The sitter mentioned it casually, but the weight of it stayed with her. Motherhood had taught her that distance always came with emotional cost. That cost never disappeared, even when the reasons were valid. Oliver faced his own external pressure when a deal began to unravel unexpectedly. A partner hesitated, raising concerns that could delay months of work. Normally, Oliver would have responded with control and urgency. Instead, he found himself pausing, listening more than speaking. That pause changed the tone of the entire conversation. That evening, they found each other again at the restaurant, without planning it. There was relief in seeing a familiar face after days filled with responsibility. They didn't rush into conversation, letting the space between them settle first. When they spoke, it was with honesty shaped by exhaustion rather than performance. The walls between them lowered naturally. Later that night, after they parted near the elevators, neither of them went straight to sleep. Oliver sat at the small desk in his room, the lights dimmed, staring at a city that no longer felt anonymous. He replayed the conversations from dinner, not searching for meaning, but noticing how calm he had felt while listening. That calm unsettled him more than stress ever had, because it exposed how rare it was in his life. For the first time in years, he questioned whether efficiency had quietly replaced intimacy. Naomi lay on her side in bed, phone resting untouched on the nightstand, her thoughts unusually gentle. She wasn't anxious, but reflective, revisiting moments she normally rushed past in her mind. She thought about how easily she had spoken that evening, without filtering or managing herself. That ease felt unfamiliar, almost like a muscle she hadn't used in a long time. It reminded her that being strong didn't always mean being contained. The next day moved forward, but something in both of them had shifted just enough to be noticeable. Oliver found himself listening more closely during meetings, less focused on steering outcomes. When a colleague spoke, he waited an extra second before responding, allowing space instead of control. That pause changed the dynamic in the room. softening conversations that were usually rigid. It surprised him how effective kindness could be without authority attached to it. Naomi experienced a similar shift during her conference sessions. She listened to questions with deeper patience, responding with honesty rather than performance. Her words landed more clearly, not because they were polished, but because they were grounded. Several colleagues lingered after her presentation, thanking her for speaking with such clarity and care. She realized that her presence, not her credentials, had made the difference. When they met again that evening, there was relief.